My name is Frank Whitney, and I was born in the Bronx, New York in 1925. When World War II broke out, December of 1941, I was 16. President Roosevelt declared war on Japan and Germany 2 days later. I was concerned because I knew I was going to go to war. 41 and 42 was the heyday of the German army. And in 1943, the tide began to turn a little bit. I enlisted, I think, in March. I took the Air Corps exam, and I graduated in June, and July 19th, I went in the Army. Leaving my family was tough. My mother was crying, I remember, and I was near tears myself. It wasn't a happy prospect. First stop was Yaphank, New York. Standing on the line with another fella, and he turned to me, he says, "I don't like the Army." I says, "That makes two of us." Where did I first go? Anniston, Alabama, to do my basic training in July. Basic training is tough. That's the toughest part of your training. Yeah, obstacle courses, physical training, and crawling through mud under gunfire and all that kind of stuff. From there, I went to Miami Beach, Florida. That was quite a treat. I wanted to be a pilot.
And how'd that go for you?
Well, it didn't go too well. I was washed out for improper attitude. The guy and I went out one night and we got drunk, and that was it. The ranking officer said, "Who goes there?" He was on guard duty. And I jumped on my friend's back and said, "A man on a horse." And then he proceeded to tell me I was going to have to wash the steps with a toothbrush, and I told him to blow it out his big fat ass. When I washed out of pilot training, they decided that I would be a very good bombardier. I was in Denver about 4 months. That was all classroom training. After Denver, I went to Peyote, Texas. That's where I got my flight training. Well, B-17, it was called a Flying Fortress, which was a joke. It was no fortress.
As bombardier, where do you sit?
Set up in the nose of the plane. There's a plexiglass nose in front of you. It's not quite the comforts of home, but you get used to it. From there, we went to Lincoln, Nebraska. That's where I met my crew. We began to hear the stories of the Holocaust, you know, but we didn't. A lot of it we didn't believe, you know, because we heard stories about them gassing children and all, and we thought nobody would do that. Hitler was on a crusade to rid the world of Jewry. We're supposedly destroying Hitler's war-making machine. That was our job. Well, my pilot's name was Eugene Wickheiser. He was 23 or 24 at the time. The co-pilot's name was Fred Willey. The navigator's name was John Schneider. We called him Jack. The engineer, his name was Sam Macon. He was the old man of the crew. He was about 35 or 36. He was the sweetest man you ever met. Then the radio operator was Kenny Dodge. The waist gunner was Red Davis, the one guy on the crew that I couldn't stand. The tail gunner was Florian Basak. My best friend on the crew was the ball turret gunner. His name was Albert J. Sequist. From there, we shipped to Bangor, Maine. Yeah, and they gave us all kinds of speeches, and one asshole, I was sitting next to A.J. Sequist from Iowa, and some colonel says, "Look at your neighbor. one of you aren't coming back. And I looked at Al and I said, so long, Al. And unfortunately, Al didn't come back. Now we find that we're assigned to the 390th Bombardment Group. We traveled through England, going to our bomb group, so we saw some of the bombed out areas. And the first night I was in England, the first night I was on my base, the gunners on the English coast had hit a buzz bomb. You know, that was the rockets that Hitler sent over. The first ones you could hear. They were called buzz bombs because they made a buzzing sound. And the gunners on the coast were shooting them down as fast as they were coming in. And I heard, you know, that was a pretty loud explosion. And that was my first sense that I was in a war zone. The pilot usually gets to name the plane. He wanted to name it Peg of My Heart because his wife's name was Peggy. But we didn't want to name it Peg of My Heart, so he had us pick out a name that we would all agree on, and we decided on Satan's Sister. In your first mission as a bombardier, what you do is you fly under the lead plane, and you don't use your bomb sight. You drop your bombs when the lead drops his. Merseburg is the target. It's supposed to be going after the oil supplies of Germany. As we turned onto the what they call the IP, the initial point, which is the lead into the target, we started to get flak, and I had my eye on the lead plane. He took a direct hit and blew up. My jaw dropped open. I was scared to death. Petrified me. Other planes took hits and they spin in, and some guys get out and you count the parachutes and you hope that they all get out. And I had my hand on the trigger to drop the bombs, and when that plane blew up, I hit the trigger, I hit the switch and dropped my bombs. So it was nowhere near the target. Well, the guys who had been flying missions, I said, Jesus, if they're all like that, I'm never going to make it. And they said, well, they're not all like that. That was a tough one. You're a veteran now, they said. I didn't feel like a veteran. I felt like a scared kid. Well, the next one that I can remember was a really bad one was the 6th or 7th mission. This was during the bulge. We had been laid up for days because the weather was so bad. It was sucked in over the continent. And by this time, the new fighters had arrived, the P-51s. And that changed the whole scope of things because they could take us into the target and wait for us and take us back out. They had a bigger fuel capacity. Well, on that mission, we had what we called the maximum effort. It means when the skies finally cleared and we were able to support the ground troops, every American plane that could fly to be in the air. And I remember sitting there just as a young kid and looking out and seeing all these planes in the sky and thinking, my country's a giant. A giant. We're trying to knock the German army out. Okay. They had made an advance, and we were just bombing the crap out of them. And we took a hit. We cannot make it back to England. We're not going to have enough altitude to fly across the channel. So we decided to crash land. We crash landed in a Belgian forest. Then we all scattered and tried to find our way back to the American lines, but nobody knew where the lines were. The lines were very fluid. Well, then I'm running around in the forest crying for my mother and hoping and praying that I run into an American outfit. I can remember it being That was one of the coldest winters in Europe. I was up the whole night, just jumping at every sound. And finally, the next day, I saw an American Ranger outfit. And I was so hungry. They gave me a chocolate bar, which was concentrated chocolate. You're supposed to take a little square of it. I ate the whole bar, and I was sick and had diarrhea. It was a terrible experience. They sent me back to an air base in a town called Zaventem, and just outside of Brussels. The doctors looked me over, checked me out, said I was okay, and it was there I met most of my crew, was already assembled there. We stayed in Zaventem 2 days, and the second night I went to Brussels, and I met a school teacher who was on vacation from Liège.
That's all you want to say about that?
That's all I want to say about it. It was a wonderful experience. The British equivalent to my rank, I made around $160 or $168. The British equivalent to my rank was getting around $12. So we had all the money. We drank all the whiskey and drank all the beer and took out all the girls. The British had a saying, there's only 5 things wrong with Americans. They're overfed, overpaid, overdressed, oversexed, and over here. We were bombing Dusseldorf. That was an industrial city and supposed to be a ball bearing plant or something. For some reason, Sam, the engineer, didn't make that flight. I think he was either sick or he was on the verge. He was constantly on the verge of a nervous breakdown. We were bombing Dusseldorf. We got hit again, and that's when Al was killed. He's pretty much in a bubble by himself. The bombardier's job was to have oxygen checks every few minutes. I would ask for a check, an oxygen check, and they would all check in. Pilot okay, co-pilot okay, and Al didn't answer. Then we went back and there was a way to turn the ball turret around by hand. They had a crank to do it, and we pulled him out and he was dead. That was really, that was a blow to the whole crew.
And how did you respond to it?
Well, I felt bad for him, you know. I mean, Al was my friend. But, you know, that's war.
Right.
A couple of days after that mission, when we got back, we again were sent to Zaventem, and we got back to the UK, and we were scheduled for a mission 4 or 5 days later, and that's when Sam kind of broke down completely. And he was taken out of the hut. It was, you know, we had Quonset huts, that's where we lived, and he was taken out in a straitjacket. It was just a hard mission. It was a tough mission. And that's when I gained a great deal of respect for the P-51s, because we were hit over Berlin, and we had to drop out of the group, you know. We were straggling. And that's when Luftwaffe loved to pick off stragglers. So we were straggling out there all alone. All of a sudden, a P-51 pulls up on my left wing, and a P-51 pulls up on my right wing. And I gave them both a thumbs up, and they rode us home. I was writing, you know, letters, but I didn't tell them anything about my missions while I was doing them. One, I didn't want to worry them, and two, you weren't allowed, you know, there was just so much you could write. So I had kept a running commentary as it was going along. But what happens is the Air Force, the Air Corps at the time, always liked to send little snippets back home, you know, and they would say things like, Hempstead Airman bombs Berlin. Of course, then they put my name down, and my father read it, and he said, Jesus, Helen, he's in the middle of it. I remember only that I was surprised that morning when I looked at our bomb load because they were incendiary bombs. I had never carried incendiary bombs before. I suspected we were going after oil wells. I didn't know we were going to burn up people, and I never knew what I did until 20 years later when I read Kurt Vonnegut's book. The Germans had punched holes in the dikes in Holland, and they flooded all the cities, and the people in Holland were starving. So we had rigged up, we had put food in the bomb bays, and we had to rig up an extra bomb bay kind of setup, you know. But the thing I remember about that mission, we flew very low, 100 feet off the ground into Holland, and we were going to drop this food. And as we got over the Dutch coast, the Dutch had mowed in the lawn. Thank you, boys. That really touched me. Once I got overseas, I was overseas till I finished my missions. That was from October of 44 until July of 45. We knew that Hitler's end was near. And then on May 7th, the war ended, and we prepared to go home. I finally landed at home on July 4th, 1945. I landed in Westoverfield, Massachusetts. And I called my mother, and I told her her 8-pound bouncing baby boy was home. I took my uniform off when I got home. When I was discharged October 28th, 1945. Put my uniform away and never looked at it again. Well, we were welcomed. We're still welcomed as heroes. I don't know, it was an adventure for me, Scotty. I was 19. Like I said to you when we first started this, when I think back on it, I don't know who that kid was that did that. He wasn't me, but my experience was the same as everybody else's.
Right.
We just all went to war.